Signs and things. While semiotics is often encountered in the form of textual analysis, it is far more to semiotics than this. Indeed, one cannot engage in the semiotic study of how meanings are made in texts and cultural practices without adopting a philosophical stance in relation to the nature of signs, presentation, and reality. We have already seen how the Caesarean and Persian models of the sign have different philosophical implications for those who adopt the stance that reality always involves representation and the signs are involved in construction of reality. Semiotics is unavoidably a form of philosophy. No semiotician or philosopher would be so naive as to treat signs such as words as they were the things for which they stand, but as we shall see, this occurs at least sometimes in philosophical phenomenology of everyday life and in uncritical framework of casual discourse. Naming things. Um, Two semioticians define feature of signs that they are treated by their users as standing for or representing others. Jonathan Swift's theoretical account of the fictional academians of Lagado outlined their proposal to abolish words together to carry around bundles of objects whenever they wanted to communicate. This highlights problems with the simplistic notion of signs being direct substitutes for physical things in the world around us. The academicians adopt a philosophical stance of naive realism in assuming the words simply mirror objects in an external world. They believe that words are all names for things, a stance involving the assumption that things necessarily exist independently of language prior to them being labeled with words. According to this position, there is a one-to-one correspondence between word and referent, and language is simply a nomenclature, an item-by-item naming of things in the world. Sacher felt that this was the superficial view taken by the general public. Within the lexicon of language, it is true that the most of the words are lexical words, which refer to things, but most of them things are abstract concepts rather than physical objects in the world. Only proper nouns have a specific reference in the everyday world, and only some of these refer to a unique entity. Example is the name of a village. Even the proper names are not as specific as they are imagined to be. For instance, a reference of Charles Sanders' fears begs questions such as Pierce at what date? Pierce as a philosopher or in some other role, or even host Pierce. Perhaps I should hesitate to attribute to fears the observation that a symbol cannot indicate any particular thing, it denotes a kind of thing. The communicative function of a fully functioning language requires the scope of reference to move beyond the particular of the individual instance. While each leaf, cloud, or smile is different from all others, effective communication requires general categories or universals. Anyone who has attempted to communicate with people who do not share the language to be familiar with the limitations of simply pointing to things. You can't point to mind, culture, or history. There are not things at all. The vast majority of lexical words in the language exist on a high level of abstraction and refer to classes and things, such as buildings, or to concepts such as construction. Language depends on categorization, but as soon as we group instances into classes, we lose any one-to-one correspondence of word and thing. Furthermore, other than lexical words, the remaining elements of the lexicon of a language consist of function words, which do not refer to objects in the world at all. The lexicon of a language consists of many kinds of signs other than nouns. Clearly, language cannot be reduced to the naming of object. The listener realist might note at this point that words do not necessarily name only physical thing which exist in an objective material world, but may also label imaginary things and also concepts. Fierce referent, for instance, is not limited to things which exist in the physical world. However, as Saussure noted, the notion of words as labels for concepts assume that ideas exist independently of words, and for him, no ideas are established in advance before the introduction of linguistic structure. It remains nationalist and nomenclaturist stance of language when words are seen as labels for pre-existing ideas and as well as for physical objects. It is reductionist, reducing language to the purely referential function of naming things. When we use language, its various kinds of signs relate to each other in complex ways which make nonsense of the reduction of language to nomenclature. Financially may be a function of language, but it is only one of its functions. A radical response to a realist is that things do not exist independently of the science system that we use. Reality is created by the media which seem simply to represent it. Language does not simply name pre-existing categories. Categories do not exist in the world. We may acknowledge the cautionary remarks of John Lyons that such an emphasis on reality as invariably perceptually shameless may be an exaggeration. Lyons speculates that most of the phenomenal world as we perceive it is not an undifferentiated continuum, and our referential categories do seem to bear some relationship to certain features which seem to be inherently salient. In support of this caveat, we may note that Gestalt psychology reported a universal human tendency to separate a silent figure from what the viewer relegates to the background. However, such observations clearly do not demonstrate that the lexical structure of language reflects the structure of an external reality. As Saussure noted, if words were simply a nomenclature for a pre-existing set of things in the world, translation from one language to another would be easy. Whereas, in fact, language differ in how they categorize the world. The signified in one language do not neatly correspond to those in another. Within a language, many words may refer to the same thing but reflect different evaluations. Furthermore, what is signified by a word is subject to historical change. In this sense, reality or the word is created by the language we use. This argument insists on the primacy of the signifier even if we do not adopt the radical stance that the real world is a product of our science system. We must still acknowledge that there are many things in the experimental world for a world for which we have no words, and that most words do not correspond to object in the known world at all. Thus, all words are abstractions, and there is no direct correspondence between words and things in the world. Referentiality. The source model of science involves no direct reference to reality outside the sign. This was not a denial extra-linguistic reality but but a reflection of his understanding of his own role as a linguistic. Saussure, Saussure accepted that in most scientific disciplines the objects of study were given in advance and existed independently of the observer's point of view. However, he stressed that in linguistics, by contrast, it is the viewpoint adapt which creates the object. While such a statement might go without comment in a discipline with an acknowledged sufficiency. In the context of human language, one can understand how it might be criticized as an idealist model. In the Saussure model, the signified is only one mental concept. Concepts are mental constructs, not external objects. A concept may, of course, refer to something in experiential reality, but the Saussurean stance is a denial of the essentialist argument that signified are distinct, autonomous entities in an object world which are definable in terms of some kind of unchanging essence. Saussure Semitic asserts the non-essential nature of the objects just like signifiers. Signifieds are part of the sign system. The sign systems signified are socially constructed. According to the Worfian stand, the signified is an arbitrary product of our culture's way of seeing. The Saussurean perspective tends to reserve the precedence which a nomenclaturist accords to the world outside language by proposing that far from the world determining the order of our language determines the order of the world. In contrast, Saurian model Peirce model of design explicitly features the referent, something beyond design to which the sign vehicle refers, true not necessarily a material thing, however it also features the interpretant which leads to an infinite series of signs, so it has been provocatively suggested that Peirce's model could also be taken to suggest the relative independence of signs from any reference. In any event, for Peirce, reality can be known via signs if representations are our only access to reality. Determining their accuracy is a critical issue. Peirce adopted from language the notion of modality to refer to the truth value of sign, acknowledged three kinds actually logical, necessity, and possibility. Furthermore, his classifications of signs in terms of the mode of relationship of the sign vehicle is to its referent reflects their modality. Their apparent transparency in relation to reality, symbolic mode for instance having low modality. Peirce asserted that logically signification could only be partial, otherwise it would destroy itself by becoming identical with its object. Theorists veer towards the extreme position of physical idealism, for whom reality is purely subjective and is constructed in our use of science, may see no problem with the Saussurean model which has itself have been described as idealist. Those draws towards epistemological realism for whom a single objective reality exists indisputably and independently outside us. The world would challenge it. According to this stance, reality may be distorted by the processes of negation involved in apprehending it, but such processes play no part in constructing the world. Even those who adopt an intermediate constructionist or construct, constructivist position that language and other media play a major part in the social construction of reality may object to an apparent indifference towards social reality in social model. Those on the political left in particular would challenge its sidelining of the importance of the material conditions of existence. A system which brackets extralinguistic reality includes truth values too, but post-Caesarian semiotics is not imprisoned within language in this way. Umberto Eco provocatively asserts that semiotics is in principle the discipline studying everything which can be used in order to lie. From the perspective of social semiotics, the original Caesarian model is understandably problematic. Whatever our philosophical positions in our daily behavior, we routinely act on the basis that some representations of reality are more reliable than others, and we do so in part with reference to cues within text which semioticians call modality makers. Such cues refers to what are variously described as the plausibility, reliability, credibility, truth, accuracy, or facticity of text within a given genre as representations of some recognized reality. Social semiotic theory of truth cannot claim to establish the absolute truth or untruth of representation. It can only show whether a given proposition is presented as true or not. From the point of view social semiotics, truth is a construct of semiosis, and as such, the truth of a particular social group arising from the values of beliefs of that group. Duality refers to the reality status accorded to our claim by a sign, text, or genre. More formally, Robert Hodge and Gunther Kurz declared that modality refers to its status, authority, and reliability of the message to its ontological status or its value of truth or fact. Modality judgment involves comparison of textual representations with models drawn from the everyday world and with models based on the genre. They are therefore obviously dependent on the relevant experience of the both world and the medium. Robert Hodge and David Tripp's semiotic study on children and television focus on the development of children's modality judgment. John Kennedy showed children a simple line during featuring a group of children sitting in a circle with a gap of their midst. He asked them to add to this gap a drawing of their own, and when they concentrated in the central region of the drawing, many of them tried to pick up the pencil which was depicted in the same style in the top right-hand corner of the drawing. Being observed in the task led them to accept unconsciously the terms in which reality was constructed within the medium. This is not likely to be a phenomenon confined to children, since when observed in narrative, we frequently fall into suspension of disbelief without compromising our ability to distinguish representations from reality. Charles Peirce reflected that in contemplating a painting, there is a moment when we lose the consciousness that is not the thing. The distinction of the real and the copy disappears, while in a conscious comparison of a photographic image with a cartoon image, the same thing, a photograph is likely to be judged as more realistic. The mental schemata involved in visual recognition may be closer to the stereotypical simplicity of cartoon image than to photographs. People can identify an image as a hand when it is drawn as a cartoon more quickly than when they are shown a photograph of a hand. This underlines the importance of perceptual code in constructing reality. Umberto Eco argues that through familiarity, an iconic signifier can acquire primacy over its signified. Such a sign becomes conventional step by step. The more its addressee becomes acquainted with it, to a certain point, the iconic representation, however stylized it may be, appears to be more true than the real experience, and people begin to look at things through glasses of iconic convention. Dialectic cues within text include both formal features of the medium, such as flatness or motion, and content features such as plausibility or familiarity, though it is their interaction and interpretation which is most important. James Monaco suggests that in film, the signifier and the signified are almost identical. The power of language system is that there is a very great difference between the signifier and the signified. The power of film is that there is not. This is an important part of what Christian Metz was referring to when he described the cinematic signifier as the imaginary signifier. The film theorist Andre Bazin describes what he calls the reproductive fallacy, according to which the only kind of representation which can show things as they really are, would be one which is or appears to be exactly like that which is represented in every respect. Texts are almost always constructed from different materials from which they represent, and representations cannot be replicas. For Bazin, aesthetic realism depended on a broader truth of reality. Ayn Ang argues that watching television soap operas can involve a kind of philosophical or emotional realism for viewers which exists at the connotative rather than the denotative level. Robert Hogg and Gunther Kress argued that different genres, whether classified by medium, example comic, cartoon, film, TV, and painting, or by content, establish sets of modality markers and overall value which act as a baseline for the genre. This baseline can be different for different kinds of viewer, reader, and for different texts or moments within text. What are recognized as realistic styles of representation reflect an aesthetic code, a concept which we will explore in detail. Over time, certain methods of production within a medium and a genre become naturalized. The content comes to be accepted as the reflection of reality. In this case, of popular television and film, for instance, the use of invisible editing represents a widespread set of conventions which has come to seem natural to most viewers. In realistic text, what is foregrounded is the content rather than the form or style of production. As in the dominant mode of scientific discourse, the medium and codes are discounted as neutral and transparent, and the makers of the text retreat to invisibility. Consequently, reality seems to coexist its representation and to speak for itself. What is said thus has the aura of truth. John Tugg argues that in realistic texts, the signifier is treated as it is where identical with the pre-existent signified, and the reader's role is purely that of a consumer. Signifier and signified appear not only to unite, but the signifier seems to become transparent so that the concept seems to represent itself, and the arbitrary sign is naturalized by a spurious identity between reference and reference, between the text and the world. The world is not the thing. A Belgian surrealist, René Magritte, Magritte painted La Tahison des Images, the Torture of Image in 1936. That is, has become one of Magritte's most famous and widely reproduced works, suggests the enduring fascinations of its theme. At first glance, its subject is banal. We are offered in realistic deception of an object which we easily recognize, a smoker's pipe, inside in view. However, the painting also includes the text, "This is not a pipe." The inclusion of text within the painting is remarkable enough, but the world gives us cause to pause. If this were a part of language lessons for a child's reading book, the style reminds me of old-fashioned Ladybird books for the children. We might accept to see the words "this is a pipe," to dissect a pipe, and then provide a label which insists that this is a pipe. Initially seems preserved, it is purely irrational, or is there something we can learn from this apparent paradox? What could it mean? As our minds struggle to find a stable, meaningful interpretation, we may not be too happy that there is no single correct answer to this question. Although those of us who are relatively tolerant of ambiguity may accept that it offers a great deal of food for thought about levels or modes of reality. The indexical word, this can be seen as key to the interpretation of this painting. What exactly does the word this refer to? Anthony Wilden suggests several alternative interpretations. First is, this pipe is not a pipe. This is not a pipe, considering with the image of the pipe. This is not a pipe, looking at the painting. This sentence is not a pipe. This is not a pipe. Is not a pipe. Although we habitually relate the meaning of the text to the stated or inferred purposes, further Margaret's own purpose are not essential to our current concerns. It suits our purposes here to suggest that the painting could be taken as meaning that these representations, or any representation, is not that which it represents, that this image of a pipe only an image that we can smoke. It seemed obvious nobody in the right mind would be so foolish try to pick it up. However, we do habitually refer to such realistic deceptions in terms which suggest that they are nothing more or less than what they decept. Any representation is more than merely a reproduction of which it represents. It also contributes to the construction of reality. Even photorealism does not depict unmediated reality. One function of art is to make the familiar strange. The non-identity of sign and thing is, of course, a very basic Caesarean principle. However, while Caesarean model is an anti-realist, the general semanticist adopt the realist stance that language comes between us and the objective world, and they sought to reform our verbal behavior to counteract the linguistic distortion of reality. They felt that one reason for the confusion of signifiers and referential signifieds was that we sometimes allow language to take us further up the ladder of abstraction than we think we are. Here is a homely example of levels that verbal abstraction in relations to a cow called Bessie. The cow known to science ultimately consists of atoms, electrons, etc. according to present-day scientific inference. True, the cow we perceive is not the word but the object of experience that which our nervous system obstructs. The word the word busy cow is the name we give to the object of the perception of labor. The name is not the object. It merely stands for the object and omits reference to many characteristics of the object. The word cow stands for the characteristics we have abstracted as common to cow and cow. So characteristics peculiar to particular cows are left out. When species refers to as livestock, only those characteristics she has in common with pigs, chickens, goats, etc. are referred to. When busy include among farm assets, reference is made only what she has in common with all the saleable items on the farm. When Bessie is referred to as an asset, still more her characteristics are left out. The word wealth is an extremely high level of abstraction, omitting almost all reference to the characteristic of Bessie. The latter metaphor is consistent with in how we routinely refer to levels of abstraction. We talk of thinkers with their heads in the clouds and of realists with their feet on the ground. As we move up the ladder, we move from the particular to general, from concrete reality to abstract generalization. The general semantics were, of course, had-headed realists, and they wanted was for people to keep their feet firmly planted on the ground. In alerting language users to levels of abstraction, the general semantics sought to avoid the confusion of higher logical types with lower logical types. Map is of a higher, more general, logically type than the territory, and linguistic representations in particular lends itself to this process of abstraction. Empty signifier. While Caesarian semiticians with language as their model have emphasized the arbitrary relationship of the signifier to the signified, some subsequent theorists have stressed the primary of the signifier. Jacques Lacan even praised Lewis Carroll's Humpty Dumpty as the master of the signifier for its declaration that when I use the word, it means just what I choose it to mean, neither more nor less. Many postmodernist theorists postulate a complete disconnection of the signifier and the signified. An empty or floating signifier is variously defined as a signifier with a vague, highly variable, uns- unspecifiable, or non-existent signified. Such signifiers mean different things to different people. They may stand for many or even any signifieds. They may mean whatever the interpreters want them to mean. In such a state of radical disconnection between signifier and signified, a sign only means that it means such a disconnection. It perhaps clearest in literary and aesthetic texts which foreground the act and the form of expression and undermine any sense of the natural or transparent connection between a signifier and a referent. However, Jonathan Color suggests that to refer to an empty signifier, it is an implicit acceptance of its status as a signifier and is thus to correlate it with a signified, even it, if this is not known. The most radical play of the signifier still requires the work through the positioning of signifieds. Shakespeare famously referred to a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and referrally signifying nothing, as early 1939 Jacobson referred to Zerside in linguistics, the unmarked form of words such as the singular from the words in which the plural involves the addition of the terminal marker. The concept of empty signifier also has some similarities with other linguistic concepts, with the notion of an empty category and with helm, self, figured or non-signified sign elements. The floating signifier is referred to in a year 950 in Strauss' introduction to work of Marcel Mauss. Roland Barthes referred to non-linguistic signs especially as being so open to interpretation that they constituted a floating chain or signified. The first explicit reference to empty signifier of which I am aware is that Barthes in his essay Myth Today defines an empty signifier as one with no definite signified. The first explicit reference to an empty signifier of which I am aware is that the postmodernist Jean Baudrillard interprets many representations as a means of concealing the absence of reality. He calls such interpretations simulacra or copies without originals. He sees a degenerative evolution in modes of representation in which signs are increasingly empty of meaning. This would be the successive phase of the image. One, it is the reflection of the basic reality. Two, it masks the perverts of basic reality. Three, it masks the absence of the basic reality, for it bears no relation to any reality, whatever it is. It is its own pure simulacrum. simulacrum. It is hardly surprising that Douglas Keeler has criticized Baudrillard as a symbolical idealist who ignores the materiality of sign production. Baudrillard's claim that the Gulf War even I never happened is, is certainly provocative. Such perspectives, of course, beg the fundamental questions: what is real? Semiotic stand which problematize reality and emphasize meditations and convention is sometimes criticized as extreme cultural relativism by realists such critics often object to an apparent sidelining of referential concerns such as accuracy. What does transparency keep obscure? Semiotics help us not to take representations for granted as reflections of reality, enabling us to take them apart and consider those qualities they present, as the linguistic Edward Sapir famously remarked, while grammar leak. Those who had learned from semiotics should search for structural leaks, seam, and scaffolding as signs of the making of the representation, and also for what has been denied, hidden, or excluded so that the text may seem to tell the whole truth